saved a touchdown, most likely.
There goes Garner to the 40, to the 30, breaks a tackle at the 20, 10, 5, unbelievable! Touchdown!
And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. We are back after the Jets had their bye week. Another Jets game, another loss, but Michael, back-to-back Jets games where it was pretty much the perfect outcome of the rookies playing well, in addition to some veterans. But overall, the Jets can't get it done in the fourth quarter, which adds another loss on their resume and leads them closer to Trevor Lawrence. But this game against the Chargers had some pretty promising signs. So let's break it down today. But first, Michael, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said, this is another game that is in the end a really good outcome because you continue moving towards that ultimate goal of getting Trevor Lawrence in that number one pick, which is not just something that's a novelty, but something that is extremely valuable for the future of this team. But at the same time, you have a lot of young players play well who can be a part of the solution going forward. So back-to-back competitive losses, and that's exactly what the Jets need right now. So things are going pretty well here over these last two games.
Yeah, and really quickly, before we hop into it, I should shout out that we are officially sponsored by Manscaped. So if you go to manscaped.com and use the code COOLYOURJETS, you get 20% off and free shipping on anything you buy there. Highly recommend it. But Michael, yeah, going off of your point, I think what I was most impressed with was Denzel Mims in this game. And it was a quiet first half for him. I think Adam Gase basically had the quote that you were telling me about, that Jay Feely said, which was essentially that the Chargers are worse in the second half, and that's when we were going to get aggressive. And the first half didn't target Mims at all. In the second half, they started going his way. And it seems like, at least through the first 3 weeks, or the first 4 weeks of Denzel Mims' career, the more you target him, the more good things happen. Michael, what did you see from Denzel Mims in this game that gives you even more hope that he can be a long-term starter on the outside for the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really impressed with what Denzel Mims has done so far. You can just compare him production-wise to what other guys in this team have done, whether it's Chris Hogan, Cager, Josh Malone, and I'm just talking about in terms of the production. Like, those guys have played in the same situation, and they haven't done anything. But Mims has managed to, when the ball has come his way, to make plays more often than not, make some really good contested catches. So really just the point of mentioning those guys is the fact that, Mims's numbers aren't amazing so far. He's averaging 55 yards per game right now, which is fantastic for a second-round receiver. But in this situation, I think it's just really, really promising because, again, like, he's not getting targeted that much. Joe Flacco has had stretches where he's been really conservative. When he has been targeted, he's had to make some really tough catches like he did in this game. And there have been throws, whether it was Darnold or Flacco, where they were throwing it behind him, limiting his potential to pick up yak or making him, again, have to make tough catches. But he keeps delivering, making these tough catches, picking up first downs. He had 3 first down catches in this game, and he drew 2 first downs through penalties. So he just continues to produce. He's actually the first Jet in team history to post at least 40 yards in each of his 4 games. So the way he's playing right now, I'm extremely encouraged. And when he does get to play, in a system with a quarterback that offers some stability, I think he's going to be really good. I don't think there's a limit to how productive, how dominant he could be. Am I saying he will be amazing? It's way too early to say that, but the way he's played so far definitely has me excited about his future.
Yeah, and he's really the first Jets receiver since 2015 Brandon Marshall to display that tenacity and that physicality on the outside. And before Brandon Marshall was probably Braylon Edwards, and before him, Keyshawn. And when you have that physicality on the outside, it opens up so many things for your offense. And that was what we saw from him at Baylor. And you mentioned him drawing those 2 penalties, and some people might shrug that off as, those are lucky or whatever, but that just points to his skill and his physicality, forcing those corners to have to get sloppy and have to hold on to him, because that's just kind of the receiver that he was at Baylor. He didn't create amazing separation. It was what he did at the point of the catch, to high point the ball, to create that last second separation, to be physical without drawing offensive penalties. And look, if Joe Douglas only gets Mekhi Becton and Denzel Mims right from the 2020 draft, which I don't think he will, we'll talk about some of the other guys in that class that I think showed some promise. But if he can come out of that draft with a franchise left tackle and a franchise receiver, that's already the best Jets draft class in the last decade. Hopefully they can get a few more pieces. and not just complete bums the rest of the picks. But the first 2 picks of Joe Douglas's draft class, which are the most important picks, it seems like he's really nailed them. And then when you remember that they traded down and still got Mims, that just again points to Joe Douglas's evaluation of the board, knowing that, hey, either Claypool, either Mims, one of those, Van Jefferson was going to be available. But obviously getting a guy like Mims has just been a huge boost to this offense. It hasn't really translated to wins, but as you said, you can't really blame him in this situation. When you look towards next year, because at this point, we're only doing these podcasts looking forward next year, there's only 6 more games to go. Obviously, we're going to have a whole offseason full of Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, free agent, head coach talk. But when you look at the type of receiver Joe Douglas should look to pair Denzel Mims with, because that's going to be a big emphasis this offseason, is that they didn't build around Sam Darnold. They have to make sure that they build around whoever the young quarterback is, even if it somehow remains to be Sam Darnold. They need to surround him with obviously continuing building up that offensive line, but with playmakers on the outside. I think Rashad Perriman has done enough in recent weeks to say, you know what, look, this guy is a great receiver number 4. Is he receiver 1? No, but we kind of knew that. We kind of knew that he was probably more of a receiver 4, can get streaky, can get hot, good depth, great deep threat, but can't really count on him for consistency. And his injury history is a little startling. But I would definitely be in favor of bringing a guy like Perriman back to be that receiver 4. But I still think you're missing that one more guy on the outside. Michael, what type of receiver should Joe Douglas look to pair with Mims and with Crowder? Obviously, the guys in free agency, you have 2 really physical guys in Allen Robinson and Kenny Golladay. Are they too similar to Denzel Mims' playing style? You have a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, but he's probably best in the slot where Crowder currently is. They could cut Crowder and free up $10 million and try to allocate his money elsewhere, but I don't think that makes much sense. And then you could look towards the draft. But as far as a prototype for a receiver to pair with Mims and Crowder, what do you think Joe Douglas should look for?
Well, usually when I'm looking at weapons to build a team, usually my philosophy is just to get as many weapons as you can, not necessarily ignoring fit, but you just want to get as many weapons as you can, and then make the fit between the players secondary. At least that's the way I usually look at it. I think the fit in the offense.
I mean, we shouldn't really take your word for that, though. Your fantasy football team is pretty bad. So
that's true. That's true.
Michael
but we are talking about fantasy, not real football. So
I was just going to say that GM Michael Nania is a little different than analytics nerd Michael Nania. But I guess I did ask you. But go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what I'm just getting at is that fit in the offense is important with the coordinator and just the overall scheme. I think more so than the players next to each other, because I think there are a lot of teams in the league that have, players with similar skill sets and that both thrive in the same offense. So I don't think you necessarily need to get someone with a different skill set to Mims, but if we are looking at the things that Mims is best at, it's easily so far been his contested catch, jump ball ability. And even though we haven't seen him targeted in the red zone because we have to evaluate Frank Gore and see what he's got because he's such a young player, so unproven. So because we're evaluating Frank Gore, haven't been able to see Mims in the red zone, but you assume he is that, goal line fade type of guy, sort of like Marshall in 2015, that can get those catches for you in that area. And obviously he's been a vertical threat in terms of jump balls. We've seen some stuff over the middle, a few throws into the flat, but I think you're looking at more of a guy who can give you, who you can run screens through, who can thrive on slants over the middle, post routes, also, stuff against the sideline and the intermediate range, out routes, comebacks, things like that. And I do think Mims can develop a lot of these parts of his, a lot of different parts of his game, such as the things I just mentioned. But still, I think that, the main thing he brings you is that contested catch ability, the blocking, the red zone. So if you are looking for someone who brings things that aren't necessarily Denzel Mims' best abilities, I think it comes down to yak ability and play over the middle, and mostly in that intermediate range.
Yeah, and I agree with your overall sentiment, even if I think your fantasy football GMing skills are pretty garbage. I think that, yeah, if you have the opportunity to bring in a guy like Allen Robinson, you absolutely have to do it, even if their skill sets are kind of similar, because it's really just talent on the outside. And in today's NFL, it doesn't really matter. We haven't really seen it with a guy like Gase, who's just so scheme specific and doesn't like to go outside the box. But if you bring in a head coach or even just an offensive coordinator that knows how to build an offense around his personnel strengths, you can get 2 physical receivers and a guy like Crowder and build an offense around that and have success. I also think the other thing to consider, and this isn't always a rule of thumb with receivers, but I think you should look at the quarterback that you have. The Bills are a good example. They did this with Josh Allen. His first year, they tried to surround him with big body Kelvin Benjamin types because they figured, 6'5" Josh Allen, he's going to throw it up to these big body receivers and they can bring it down. They just wanted to play basketball. But then what they realized is that Josh Allen struggled a little bit with his accuracy. So what they decided to do was to get smaller, quicker receivers who can create that separation. So then Allen has a wider area to hit his receivers, and they lack some physicality, but you see how well it fits Josh Allen's strengths. And if they do end up with Trevor Lawrence, I think it is important to look at the type of receivers that come out of Clemson. Not always, but often they're these big bodied, physical type of receivers. And that's what Trevor Lawrence has basically played with at Clemson. So if you're pairing Allen Robinson and Denzel Mims, that clearly fits well with Trevor Lawrence's play style because that's essentially what he's been doing at Clemson. But obviously exciting stuff from Denzel Mims. It seems like he's getting better each and every week. I know there was that one play on the 4th down where, might not have caught it, might have been out of bounds, but he still ended up bringing down the ball. They still got the yards. I think his knee was probably down. Michael and I were trying to decide after looking at the replay.
Yeah, we were talking about it. I think you can argue he got it. I think they might have overturned it if they looked at it, but it counts. It's right in the stat sheet, so I like it. I agree with it.
I think, any positive Mims highlights is what I'll take, but it's certainly the physicality and his ability of tracking the ball has been impressive. You could see it in college from him. He had plenty of spectacular catches on the sideline, and he's already had a few that come to mind, the one against Kansas City and a few today. He's a really exciting prospect for the Jets, and they haven't really had a young receiver like that in a long time. And Joe Douglas wants to build through the draft. So if he goes into this offseason with a similar mindset of last year, I think he'll be a little bit more aggressive than last year's free agency. But if he goes in with a similar mindset of not overpaying, and I do think Allen Robinson is going to get a monster deal this year, and same with Kenny Golladay and same with Juju Smith-Schuster, I definitely think that end of the first, probably more so the beginning of the second, is a great place to get a guy to pair with Mims, a similar area where they targeted Mims last year. And if you can bring in, let's say, a guy like Rashad Bateman, that's a very popular one between Jets fans, Chris Olave, whoever it is that you can pair with Mims, Crowder, bringing a guy like Perine back, and then maybe you sign a lower tier free agent like DeMarcus Robinson or something like that to build out your receiving core. Just give yourself some depth. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what Joe Douglas is this offseason to build around who his quarterback is, because I think he's caught some flack for how he built around Darnold this offseason, but I don't know how committed he was into immediately throwing a lot of assets there. I think he was way more focused on the offensive line. Speaking of the offensive line, Michael, what did you think of their performance today? Because I think they've been getting better each and every week. That's, a position that obviously depends a lot on chemistry. And of course, it was tough to start the season with no preseason, no spring training reps. Just what were your thoughts on their performance? Obviously, Mekhi Becton returned. Your overall take on that, and then we can go into the specifics with Becton and McGovern and whatnot.
Much like Adam Gase, got to watch the film once it comes out during the week. But from at least on first watch, the biggest thing that stood out to me is that, and this has been every time this has happened this season, but when Chuma Edoga goes out and he's replaced Becton in games earlier this season and Fant in this game, but when Edoga goes out there, that's when you can really understand how good he is, and then Fant just how solid, decent, respectable he is. Because Edoga comes in there, and then you just notice him time after time, whether it's getting beat and holding someone to prevent a sack or giving up a clear sack, or the rushing production just flying out the window. That's when you really appreciate what those two guys have done this season, when Edoga goes in there. So when Fant left in this game, Edoga made some big mistakes, and he actually was one of the guys who we were kind of hoping would develop this season and maybe even beat out Fant in the offseason for that starting job. That didn't happen. He hasn't been able to show anything when he's come in. So that pick by Maccagnan does not seem to be panning out. So they're definitely
as do most Mike Maccagnan draft picks.
That is true, as do most of his draft picks. So it's not like that's a surprise. But he did play, so that kind of makes him above average compared to other day two Maccagnan picks. But
he didn't drive his car the wrong way down the Lincoln Tunnel, or just
that's true. So he's actually a home run by Mac standards. But that's kind of stood out most. But the running game was pretty good in this one. Both Perine and Gore averaged 4.1 yards a carry, and their yards per carry are never going to be super high because you need to have those home runs to get it to like a 5, a 6, and neither of those guys seem to have the speed to do it, or at least Perine hasn't showed it so far. But 4.1 when you're just getting chunk gains is really solid, and that's what they were doing in this game. So it looked pretty good for the most part. Again, we'll have to see throughout the week because the one broadcast view is hard to judge. But and this is a tough front too with Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram. So I think for the most part, especially Becton, I know there was that one play that stood out where he got like flattened when he was pulling outside. But other than that, I don't recall too much damage against him at all. So it seemed pretty good. And only one sack for Flacco. Not that the sack total matters more than the pressures, because sacks is more of a quarterback thing. Pressures is what matters most. But it did seem pretty solid upon first watch.
Yeah, and you talk about Becton getting flattened. Yeah, I mean, that's going to happen to a rookie, and he's been so amazing this year that I think you can give him a pass. It didn't really he still had an amazing game, so it wasn't a huge impact on his overall grade for this game. In looking at Becton, I think there are some concerns about his durability, and that was kind of a thing coming out of college with his weight, and would that lead to long-term health concerns with him? I think with this, it seems to be, and he did return to the game after he left for a brief period of time, but it is notable just because he's been pulled in multiple games at this point in the season. It seems like it's the same issue. And in that case, that just points to poor management by the Jets of his injury and not necessarily the fact that he's injury prone or anything. If Becton was injuring a lot of different parts of his body, different shoulders, different hamstrings, ankle, whatever, then you could start to say, this guy has a durability problem. But when it's the same injury getting re-aggravated over and over again, it just points to the Jets mismanaging it. And I'm not saying necessarily they completely have. He did finish the game. He played well, but it's just something to monitor. We saw him clearly mismanage it on Thursday Night Football against the Broncos, and he's had to miss multiple other games after that. So with Becton, I'm kind of the mind that we know he's good. If he's having any issues at all with that shoulder, why play him through that? Just let him sit, let that fully heal. I don't even know if that's something he could need surgery on in the offseason or something. Offensive linemen tend to deal with a lot of silent injuries, and you hear about them after the season. I think the shoulder peck could be a lot worse than we're hearing, and I think that the Jets, in an 0-10 season at this point, shouldn't be throwing him out there unless he's
mathematically eliminated from the playoffs.
You're right. One of the earliest teams to ever get mathematically eliminated.
Even with 7 teams now.
Yeah, exactly. That's just unbelievably sad. But when you look at Fant and Udoka, that's the perfect case study on a Mac offensive lineman and a Douglas offensive lineman. And you said this to me right at the beginning of the year, and then I tweeted it out today about when you look at Fant, a lot of people hated that signing. You have to kind of remember
me included.
You included. I will say I was shouting, let's give Fant a chance here, but I also like Deshaun Kaiser more than Patrick Mahomes. So I guess my evaluation skills can go out the window. But I will say that with George Fant, he got a lot of flack for that signing. To give it context, he was the first signing for Joe Douglas after a long day of nothing happening. He got 3 years, $30 million, which a lot of people thought was way too much for a backup tackle on a team that desperately needed offensive line play in Seattle and still does need offensive line play. And it got a lot of flack. And those are the type of signings that deserve the most scrutiny from a GM, a signing that goes against the curve, or against the grain is what I meant to say, against the grain, against common belief, gets a lot of scrutiny, and it turns out to be a good signing. It just points to good evaluation skills from Douglas. And the only reason I liked Fant, obviously he had a few Fant cakes that I retweeted, but it was more so just, I firmly believe in Joe Douglas's ability to evaluate offensive linemen. He gave him a big deal. I knew he clearly believed in him. And of course that deal was more like a 1 year, $10 million, 3 times in a row. And they could cut him after this year if they really wanted to free up that space. But those are the type of deals that really deserve, the most praise for Douglas. It's easy when you're picking number 1 to take Trevor Lawrence, but it's a lot harder to find a guy like George Fant, who in some ways was a hidden gem, came in immediately a captain and has held his own at right tackle. And I'm of the mind, and I don't think I would have said this at the beginning of the season, despite praising, or not necessarily praising, but at least giving George Fant that signing a chance. I think at the beginning of the year, if you asked us, it said, okay, George Fant's going to be the right tackle this year, and then they'll cut him. But now I'm of the mind where I think he's earned that $10 million contract, assuming he plays well for the rest of the 6 games. Obviously, he had an injury today. Well, hopefully he's all right and can finish the season. But even if he doesn't, if you get an indication that's not a long-term injury, I'm of the mind that, yeah, you bring Fant back, you let him, start next year. You're confident in your 2 tackle spots, and then you use your assets and address the other needs of the team. I don't think right tackle right now, or I guess both tackle spots, are a huge need for the Jets. I think down the line, you're going to want to replace Fant. Probably in my ideal world would be next offseason is when you would replace him. But George Fant, though, and Michael, maybe you could talk a little bit more about this, has been a really great signing when you consider how much hate it got at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you made about what it says about Douglas's evaluation ability, because that's definitely something that I was saying before the season, that this is going to be a signing that's going to tell us a lot about Douglas's evaluation ability, because like you said, you can pick Trevor Lawrence number 1. You could, make big money signings. There's not too much scouting ability involved with that. But for Douglas to attack a key position of need at right tackle with a guy who was a backup in Seattle, mostly playing as a 6th lineman, only had, I think, less than a season's worth of career starts, actually starting, finishing a game at either left tackle or right tackle. To sign a guy like that as your starting right tackle, key position of need with a relatively large contract, is a pretty big gamble. And based on his lack of playing time, to do that, it has to be based on something that you've seen on film, because the production wasn't there in terms of either reputation, playing time, his production with pressures, anything like that. So for you to make that signing, you have to see something on film, and either both Douglas and just the staff as a whole, to believe in that guy. And so far, we've seen really positive development from him, and he's been a solid starter for them so far. I would be more than okay with keeping him around on his $9.4 million price tag next season, which I believe it is. And I think that's only supposed to be somewhere around 10th most among right tackles as of right now next season, which for the way he's played, no, he hasn't been the 10th best right tackle, but if he's been competent, which I believe he has been, that's a price you pay at a position that is very important and hard to find competent starters, as we see every time one of these 2 guys go out. So it's a very positive thing for Douglas, and what it tells us about his scouting talent, for him to be able to, for the Fant signing to be looking good so far.
Yeah, and the other one that got some scrutiny was Greg Van Roten, who I think at the beginning of the season did not play well. I was not a fan of him. He backed Adam Gase publicly, which didn't help him in the eyes of Jets fans. But as a fellow Jets fan, there was some hope that, okay, this guy could be relatively good. And I thought he's been a lot better the last few weeks. I'm not necessarily sure how he played in this game. Michael, maybe you can give us a better insight. As you said, it's a lot harder to tell on the broadcast angle than the All-22. But he's a guy that I think they could cut Alex Lewis and bring back Van Roten. I think they should bring back one of them next year, whoever plays better. You bring them back, and then you have an incumbent starter, and then you can continue to address the offensive line in the draft and free agency. What are your thoughts on Greg Van Roten? And then the next guy would be Connor McGovern, who I think has been underwhelming. He had a penalty today, and I think he was the guy that we thought, okay, him and Becton are long-term pieces. Right now, McGovern will be here next year, but I think he's been fairly disappointing and potentially could be a guard next year for the Jets. There's some rumblings that that's where they'd like him to play, so he could be sliding over to guard. But what are your thoughts on the Jets' interior offensive line thus far through the season?
Well, like you said, Van Roten, the first 4 games, I mean, he was brutal. He was probably the worst player in the offense. And at that point, it seemed like cutting him was going to be a no-brainer. But he just turned it around on a dime the past 5 games. Coming into this one, he only allowed 2 pressures over that span. I believe he was pretty good in this game. I don't remember a ton of interior pressure. I do remember one nice pancake he had in the run game, but one play does not make an entire game. But at least coming into this game, he's playing a lot better and seeming like easily the most competent interior offensive lineman of the trio. So Van Roten, at least the way he's played the past few weeks, because the first 4 weeks still count, and he has to keep this going throughout the rest of the season. But the way he's played so far definitely looks like a good, at least good depth piece next season. But if you can't upgrade, can be a stopgap starter for you next year. And then McGovern at center has definitely been disappointing. Pressure numbers way up from last season. Were very good last year. This year, he's been right up there in that number one spot the whole season. But I do think, and look, he has been disappointing for sure, but I think it's worth considering the guy who's been playing to his left, Alex Lewis, because most of the issues in terms of the pressures he's allowed, and even in the run game, most of the issues have been on that side, whether it's been combo blocks, picking up blitzes, stunts, things like that. And not that everything's Lewis's fault, because again, McGovern still has not quite been the player he was last year, but Alex Lewis has been extremely bad the entire season. Right. And I do think that's contributing to making McGovern look a little bit worse. And there's still, he's the center, the entire core of the communication of a unit that is entirely thrown together, 5 new pieces that had a limited offseason. So that could be hurting him as well. But still, I think you do want to see more from McGovern. At this point, he's been below average. I don't think terrible, even though his PFF grades and pressure numbers are. I don't think he's been terrible, just considering all those things I mentioned. Lewis, the communication, and in the run game, I think he's been not necessarily great, but pretty good. Probably decent to solid. In protection is where most of the issues have been, but I don't think he's been bad. He's probably been below average, but I do think the Jets paid him to be better than that. He was a top 10 guy last year, and that was his first season as a full-time starting center. So, you maybe even expected progression off of that, considering the lack of experience at the position. Right. But so I definitely would hope to see him play better down the stretch, because he's going to be back next year. They can't escape that contract after this season. So like you said, maybe they could move him over to guard if they find a center they like in the draft or free agency. But I do think the best case scenario is seeing him kind of get back to the level he was at in 2019. And then you can go into next season with him as, he's your starting center, and you feel good about that, because right now you don't necessarily feel very good about him with the way he's played this season. But at the same time, I think better guard play will help. More camaraderie. This line will help, especially if you keep Van Roten into next season and he keeps playing well. So disappointing so far for McGovern, but I don't think to the point where he's necessarily a bust signing.
Yeah, and they did sign or claim Pat Elfin, who's probably more of a depth piece. He's not very good, but it does lend you to the idea that potentially you could give McGovern a little bit of a tryout at guard over these last few games. Put a guy like Elfin or Josh Andrews or somebody in at center for a few games and just see how McGovern looks at guard in your system. But I agree. I think that McGovern's traits lend him more towards being a center. I've been fairly surprised at the way he's played. But, the center position is just so dependent on chemistry. And as I said a little bit earlier, offensive linemen tend to deal with a lot of silent injuries. So maybe he's hurt in some way that's affecting his strength. I mean, that was always the thing with Brian Winters, that you'd hear that he tore his pec and played through it for 14 games. And it's just like, well, I kind of just wish he would have gone out because he was pretty bad. But as far as what Joe Douglas can do this offseason, it really does depend a lot on a guy like Connor McGovern, what you want to do with him. Because I think we know, if we're going to stick with what we were saying earlier, you stick with Fant and you stick with Becton, that interior is what needs some work. I'd imagine that Douglas is going to try to target offensive linemen with that Seahawks pick. I personally, if a corner like J.C. Horn is there, I'm going to take that corner. But that end of the first round is a great area to get interior offensive linemen. That's where a lot of the top interior offensive linemen in the league come from. And they'll have their pick of the litter. If they want to go guard a big, nasty guy like Trey Smith and pair him up next to Becton, you could do that and then roll with McGovern at center, or slide, I guess, McGovern over to right guard and sign a center. Or you could go in the free agency route and sign a guy like Joe Thuney, who was rumored to be one of Joe Douglas's top picks, and perhaps the only guy that Joe Douglas was willing to splurge on if he shakes free from New England this offseason, like many expect him to. I could totally see Douglas targeting him, using that cap space on a guy like Thuney. And then maybe you use that pick and you draft a center instead of a guy like Trey Smith. You take a guy like Creed Humphrey or Josh Myers or somebody with that pick, or maybe in the second round. Or you could stick with the guard and again, roll with McGovern in center. There's a lot they can do in that interior offensive line. I know that that's something that Joe Douglas is ecstatic to do this offseason. But I think, it starts with it. You're probably going to cut Lewis. I think you bring back Van Roten. I think you're bringing back Fant. I think, and again, this will point to Joe Douglas's evaluation skills. He has to make a determination on if McGovern is more of a center or guard. Personally, I think you give him another year at center. I think that's what he's going to be better at. And I think this offensive line our goal for it at the beginning of the season was that they're going to be from one of the worst in the league to league average. And I feel like they've done that. And this year, I think they have a chance, especially with an elite franchise left tackle like Mekhi Becton and whatever else Douglas is going to do this offseason. I think they have a chance to really move it into the above average, maybe even the top 10 type of unit in this league. I'm really excited to see what Douglas does with this position group. Last few thoughts on the offense before we talk about the defensive guys. Chris Herndon, who had a brutal drop to open up the game. I mean, maybe his worst of the season. I mean, he needs to see a sports psychiatrist or something. Just the fumbles, the drops. It's clearly a mental issue. We know he has all the physical gifts. He was balling out in training camp, so it's not like any of his injuries from last year are still ailing him. It just seems like a purely mental thing, and he's in his head, and that whenever that ball is in the air and it's thrown to him, he's thinking, oh, don't drop it, and then he drops it. It just, as somebody who was not a professional athlete, that's what it definitely appears like is going on between the ears with Chris Herndon, that it's just a mental issue for him. But to his credit, he did make a couple of nice catches towards the end of the game, including a touchdown. Michael, what were your thoughts on Chris Herndon's performance today and his performance on the season? Because you were saying in the beginning of the year, when people were criticizing him, you were saying he's getting open, he's just not getting thrown to. Now he's gotten thrown to a few times and he's had some pretty big drops, but those two huge catches today. What were your thoughts on Herndon's performance?
Well, yeah, this was it turned out to be an odd performance because the first target he got was just another classic Chris Herndon drop. After that one, I posted that he's making me miss Jeff Cumberland. So that's the depths that it was at.
It was a Stephen Hill level of drop. If you didn't, it was
like a wide open pass into the flat. It was so bad.
Like I could have caught that. I mean, that's easy to say as somebody who's just sitting on their couch eating a bowl.
Oh yeah, you're physically capable of catching it. Right. Would you catch it in that scenario? There's a very good chance you would drop it. And same thing for me.
Whoa,
we were both physically capable.
Have you seen me play flag football? I'm kind of a monster. But okay.
Well, I think Chris Herndon would also look like a monster.
That's probably if Chris Herndon was playing in my Turkey Bowl games, he would probably win MVP. So I guess you're right. Checkmate there.
But he started off with that catch, and then he comes back and he makes his best catch of the season after that on the right side of the field, and then he makes surpasses that in the end zone and makes a great touchdown catch, even better than that one. So easily his two best plays of the season. Right after another bad drop. So after you posted that about him needing to see a sports psychiatrist, I guess he did that.
Saw one at halftime.
And then he was back to being 2018 Chris Herndon. But I mean, those two catches were the guy that, we thought we were going to see throughout this season. An athletic, someone who can get up there and make catches in midair, sort of like Denzel Mims can do. He had a lot of these acrobatic catches in 2018, and I thought we were going to see a lot of them this year, especially with that connection on scrambles with him and Darnold. But obviously, overall, it goes without saying how disappointing his season has been. But, I mean, we did see two flashes, finally, of something here for the first time. So if he can get going, I mean, I know for the most part we've ruled him out because he's been that bad so far. But if he can get going over these last 6 games, that's definitely something you take as the Jets. You can use as much internal progression as you can get across the roster from young players. So he still had that 2018 season that still exists. It happened. It was a really good, promising campaign for a rookie tight end. His production is right up there with some of the best rookie tight end seasons in recent memory. Didn't get the chance to really build off of that in 2019. He only played in the one game against the Giants. And coming back this season, we thought he would, and he's been a complete disappointment. But we still do have 6 games left, and he finally showed some positive signs in this one. So if he can build on it, finish strong, then it's definitely something you take as the Jets. But still only 2 catches, so a long way to go for him to make up for what he's done so far.
Yeah, from a team perspective, I don't really believe in the whole building on last year. People talked about the Jets finishing 6-2, and then we're going to build on that in 2020. Unless you really have 90% of the same roster, I don't really believe in that. But from a specific player perspective, I do believe in that. I think that if Chris can get some momentum going at the end of the season, I think that'll give him confidence heading into the offseason. As far as what Joe Douglas should do at the tight end position, I think that first he's going to cut Ryan Griffin. I think that contract extension was a solid move at the time, considering what Griffin was doing, but they do have an out after this year, and I think they'll take it. I think it'll only cost them maybe $1 million in dead money. I have to double check that, but they can get out of that deal with Ryan Griffin, who's also been another disappointment. hasn't really got much of a chance. But as somebody who said before the season started that he thought he would never be the same after that injury, that was just a major red flag for this season. I think that Herndon is the ideal candidate for the post Adam Gase Freedom Watch. I think he's a guy that, because we've seen all that potential in 2018, I still believe in Chris Herndon. But I don't think you can.
I guess he's a candidate, but you can't blame Adam Gase for him
absolutely not. But there is just something about changing of scenery, the way he's being utilized. I mean, Chris Herndon is dropping balls out there. It's not Adam Gase, but there is something to be said for a player's confidence in the way that he's being coached and the way that they handle a situation like this. That I do think that Joe Douglas shouldn't trade Herndon at his lowest value. I think you give him a role next year. I don't think you bury him on the bench either, but I do think you should bring in a competent number 2, maybe even a number 1 tight end, and have that 2 tight end set with Herndon. If they go after a head coaching candidate like we think they should in Arthur Smith, Jonnu Smith is definitely a guy to watch as the versatile do-it-all tight end for Tennessee. And I think he'd be an awesome pairing with Chris Herndon. If not, you can draft one. But I think Chris Herndon needs some help at that position. He may end up being Batman, but for right now, he looks like he may just be Robin. And even he might not even be a superhero at all, considering the way he's been dropping balls. But those 2 catches in this game and the 6 games that he has the rest of the season, he gets a chance to show what he can do. I think with the new coaching staff as well. I still believe in him. I still think he should have a prominent role in the offense next year. But I think they probably put too much on his shoulders for this season, and he's not living up to that. What are your thoughts on what Douglas should do in the tight end position? Do you agree with that? Do you think that they should try to move on from Chris Herndon? Do you think he should be the starter? Just your overall take on the tight ends in 2021.
I mean, Herndon's definitely worth keeping around. I don't think there's anything to be gained with getting rid of him. I mean, unless someone wants to trade, something that is worth more than what he's given you so far. But I think he's worth keeping around. At the same time, though, you do need to, I think, add at least some. I think probably the day 3 of the draft is where you would want to look there.
Trey McKitty.
Yep, Trey McKitty is our guy for some reason. I think he has like 3 catches this season, but
Trey McKitty's my guy, Michael. I called Salvin Ahmad last season. He's yours.
You built the train, but I'm now riding it with you.
Michael's now right. Just like Arthur Smith when people tweet you.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike Lanani, a great article about Arthur Smith. I will say that I did call Salvin Ahmad last season. He's now a starter for the Dolphins. So my late round draft picks, I don't know. I mean, maybe I should be a scout, but then I go back to that Kaiser over Mahomes thing when I was like 17 years old, and that kills all that momentum. So
you did also say Jakeem Grant.
Okay. Jakeem Grant. Okay, I thought you were gonna crap on me for another bad take that I've had. But yeah, Jakeem Grant. So I've got those day 3 guys pegged down. It's all about the YouTube highlights. That's my secret.
You can tell within the first highlight based on how impressive that is. Like
I watch one highlight.
Next one.
Yeah. I watch one highlight, the first play for all those day 3 guys, and if it's impressive, I'm put them on my board. That's my scouting technique. You can try it for yourself.
Also based on how many cinematic replays you get. If we're getting play on play, this guy's good. But if you gotta see replays and you gotta see like celebration cuts,
and if it has like really,
it's filler. This guy doesn't add anything.
If the music in the video is terrible, he's immediately off my draft board. If they have a lot of like him celebrating and those like cinematic cuts like you're talking about, yeah, he's off the draft board. But I will say Trey McKitty checks the boxes that Jakeem Grant and Salvin Ahmad checked. So I'm all about Trey McKitty. Is just what I'm calling it now.
Yeah, send this entire recording to Joe Douglas. I think he'll hire you immediately.
I'll attach it with my Arthur Smith article.
If he sees that though, we're definitely getting hired.
I think there's at least, what do you say, like a 10% chance that somebody in the front office has seen that article. It did pretty well. I mean, that was the number 1 article in JetX history. So somebody had to have read it and be like, hey, Chris Johnson, look at this guy. This guy seems pretty solid. If they get that interview, the mentions that me and you are going to get, if he gets hired regardless, I mean, that article is going to explode even more so than it did.
I cannot wait for the coaching search, and I'm just going to be on the edge of my seat.
For them to hire Jim Caldwell or Jim Harbaugh or anything.
It'll be the complete letdown. But I mean, I think we were talking about the tight ends. So to talk about the tight ends a little bit, I think day 3, Trey McKitty, guys like that with athletic upside are probably who you're looking for. Just to get some receiving upside, because I think you have blocking down with Wesco. I don't think he's amazing, but he gets the job done in terms of blocking. So I think you're okay there. So you want as much upside as you can get, but at the same time, I don't think you do still have some upside with Herndon, even if, look, he's been terrible, but you do have some, at least some potential there. But I think when you're looking at your moves at tight end, you want receiving upside for the most part. And I believe in blocking as much as anyone, but I do think Wesco has that down. So you probably want to be looking for some help in the passing game. At the same time, though, I'd rather be looking for weapons at receiver. So tight end's probably near the bottom of my list of needs, just because, not that it's not a need, but this team just has so many of them.
Right. You can win with Chris Herndon at tight end, but you can't win with Lamar Jackson and Javelin Guidry at corner.
Right, exactly. And that's not to say Herndon's good, but it's tight end. It's something that if you can fill it, it's a major bonus, but it's not a position like a team can't win without a tight end. So definitely looking for some help there. And it's a position they need to hopefully get some more, just infuse something new into there to compete with Chris Herndon, but not at the top of the needs list for me.
Yeah, and then I know I already said finishing up on offense, but really quickly to touch on QB and running back, because I would say, given that Joe Flacco and Frank Gore are starting there's not too much to talk about, but there is La'Mical Perine, who did score a touchdown today. What do you think about his future on this team? Obviously, it's inexcusable at this point that Frank Gore is getting the majority of the carries. Although I love Frank Gore, I wish it was a better team for him. I really do think that we should get as many reps to Perine as possible, just for two reasons. One, the evaluation of him, but also for himself. I mean, the more reps he gets, the better he's going to be. My personal belief is that Perine is not the long-term starter, but he might be the long-term, change of pace back. And I think if you compare him with a guy in the draft, or maybe you sign somebody to pair with him, Salvon Ahmed is a free agent. I think that could be a really nice 1-2 punch for the Jets. I think that Perine has established himself as a solid, capable running back in this league who can start if necessary. He could end up being a superstar running back. We just haven't seen too much of him. But I think right now we've at least seen, okay, he can at least play in this league. He's not terrible. He's probably the best running back on the Jets roster, but he doesn't really make too many guys miss an open field just yet. But he does have solid vision. He certainly can contribute as a pass catcher. What are your thoughts on what Douglas should do at the running back position with a guy like La'Mical Perine? We haven't seen too much of anybody else at that position that should be here next year. It's funny that Kalen Ballage is actually the running back release that hurts more than Le'Veon Bell, considering that Ballage actually had a very solid game for LA today. And he's a guy that they could have held on if he had not gotten Sam Darnold killed a few times in that Thursday night game. But your thoughts on the running back position moving forward?
Well, I got to be honest on Perine. I've been very positive about a lot of guys in this podcast, but Perine is not a guy that I'm too high on right now. I did like him a lot coming in for his, the potential to be the guy that you're talking about, that running back too. But so far, I haven't really seen anything. I mean, you talk about the inability to make guys miss. That's kind of a running back's job, and he has been near the bottom of, I think, about bottom 5 in missed tackles forced per carry throughout this season. So that's obviously not good. He hasn't shown much long speed when he has gotten to the second level. And in terms of vision, I don't think his vision is good either. There have been a lot of holes this season that he hasn't been finding, and he's just been very, very one cut, very downhill.
So what does he do?
Finding the cut. I think the point is he doesn't do anything. That's kind of my point here, honestly.
Do you think Douglas should have targeted maybe a higher ceiling pick at running back?
That is what
just because
about. When that pick was made, there were higher upside running backs available who might not have been as steady all around as Perine was, but they did have more speed, more open field moves, things like that.
And when running back is as replaceable as it is,
right,
you should probably target
you would prefer the upside, because look at the free agent. I'm looking at the list right now. Free agent running backs. They're just it's hard to go wrong. James Conner, Todd Gurley, Mike Davis, Kenyon Drake, Jerick McKinnon.
So if you're in that position,
Aaron Jones,
we praise Douglas. I see what you're saying. And look, I don't think there's any running back picked after Perine that's necessarily balling out. But I think Anthony McFarland, I think, was the guy that we had pointed to as who had the home run speed. And it's like, if you're in that position, I think that's a really good point, that maybe another look, I don't want to say miss because I still think that Perine's going to be on this team for a while. The reason
it's only 10 games.
Right. And he still could be. I mean, look, as a rookie running back in the NFL with a solid offensive line, but not an amazing offensive line, the more reps that he gets, the better he's going to be. So I'm not trying to discredit Perine at all. I think the reason we praise the pick, and I still think there is some positives to that pick, is Douglas entered that 4th round saying, who are the guys that I can get that can contribute immediately? And Perine is certainly that. But when you have a position as replaceable as running back, when you see guys like Kalen Ballage signed right off the streets and having great games, maybe you should aim a little higher, not really worry about the floor, because if he doesn't work out, you can always sign a guy like Kalen Ballage. Hell, even Ty Johnson and play him and get similar production. Running back is one of those positions where it's just so easy to replace, despite the fact that they touch the ball on at least 50% of the plays, they're highly replaceable.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not bearing him yet. It's only 10 games. And look, the Jets emphasizing Frank Gore as much as they have definitely doesn't make any sense. The production between them hasn't been too much different to really warrant it. So I definitely think he should be getting more touches. His career is not over after 10 games. All I'm saying is that so far, I mean, I haven't really seen anything. I mean, in pass protection, there have been flashes, but he did have that one game. I believe it was, I forget exactly which game it was, but he had that, I believe it wasn't the Miami game. I forget which one it was exactly, but he had one game where he really struggled, and that definitely was worrying. I'm just saying so far, he really hasn't, I mean, I haven't seen anything in the run games that I like from him, and that can definitely change. But at least so far, it hasn't turned out. But it's okay. It's a 4th round pick. These picks do not, even at running back, do not pan out too well. Like you said, no, there isn't a single running back after Perine who was drafted after Perine that has more rushing yards than him right now, or is even averaging 4 yards per carry on a high volume. So it's hard to hit these picks. So it's okay.
Right.
If he doesn't hit it, it's not a complete miss. But all I would say is that next year, let's take another shot. Take another 3rd, 4th round running back.
Right.
Perine doesn't block that from happening because you did it this year. Just keep shooting, and eventually you're going to find someone who really works.
Yeah, I think, and that was, maybe Douglas would have taken the higher upside guy if he really believed in him. I think he probably just looked at Perine and said, look, there's a good football player who's going to be on our team for 5 years. I'll take him. And then, to what you're saying, next year, if Najee Harris is sitting there in the 2nd and I really like him, maybe I take him, or maybe I sign somebody, or I just keep taking those shots. So definitely not crapping on Douglas for that pick. When you make the point that there really hasn't been any running back picked after him that's been better. Perine has had a very solid rookie season, but nothing special like some Jets fans are making him out to be.
I really don't think it would be solid, because you look at this offensive line and their individual numbers. Their run blocking
average. He's come in and been competent.
Per carry are all like average, middle of the league, but Perine's numbers in terms of broken tackles, his overall yards per carry are like bottom of the league. So he's been way below.
Okay, but Trent Richardson was taken 3rd overall, and then he was running straight into his center's backside every. So at least he's competent, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe I shouldn't say solid. Solid is a little too generous, but again, this is 6th game playing. So give him a chance. And he also had a good training camp, if you listen to the bit. But I mean,
yeah, I'm definitely giving him a chance. I mean, I just look at this offensive line and I see, not that they've been amazing, but I definitely have seen enough to where, I mean, 3.6 yards per carry from Perine coming into this game against the Chargers. I think there's definitely been room for a lot more than that. Bell averaged the same, about the same last season behind a much worse offensive line. So I definitely think the potential has been there for a lot more. Yards have been left on the field, but again, only 10 games.
Yeah,
they get better.
The caveat is that there's 6 games left, and
he deserves a lot more touches.
Right, he's only getting half the carries. Let's get to the defense, because I don't think there's really much to say about QB. And Joe Flacco's 1,000-yard stare on the sideline. I mean, he just inspires zero confidence. Whenever they cut to him, he just seems like he's, off in La La Land. I have no idea what's going on between the ears for Flacco, but he's been probably better than Darnold. In some ways, although I'm looking forward to watching Darnold again, because seeing a young quarterback for the Jets play well is exciting, and it also builds up the trade value for Darnold. They're not really getting anything out of having Flacco play well. It's really only beneficial for the Jets to have Flacco play poorly. I will say, quick 30-second break before we go to the defense, I am somewhat interested to see what they do at the QB position, assuming they get a guy like Trevor Lawrence, because then you have the conundrum with James Morgan, who isn't even good enough to be a backup yet. Do you bring in, and I'm of the belief that if you have a rookie quarterback, that you should bring in a veteran, bring in a Mark Brunell type, who is that for Mark Sanchez, or Josh McCown, who is that for Sam Darnold, to mentor the quarterback. He doesn't necessarily need to be amazing, but provide some stability. You can say, hey, kid, I've done this myself. Here's what you do in this situation, blah, blah, something that the coaches can't really communicate. And James Morgan can't really do that at this point. So I think you're looking at another year where James Morgan may be an inactive third string QB again, but the hope for Morgan is that he can play really well in that preseason. That gives the Jets hope for him being a backup in 2022, or maybe even attracting some trade interest, which was part of the reason the Jets took him, is that you put together a few good preseasons, or your starter goes down, he plays well, you can get a Jimmy G type of trade for him. That's at least the ceiling. But looking at the defense, a lot more rookies playing, with Bryce Hall playing out there, Jabari Zuniga, Ashton Davis, all getting meaningful snaps and starting the trenches again. What were your thoughts on their performance? I thought Quinnen Williams is a guy that, and if you had said to us at the beginning of the year, and I know we've said this on this podcast before, that Mekhi Becton was going to be as good as he's been, and Quinnen Williams was going to have that breakout year that, I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I thought he was going to have. I mean, I was really looking forward to it, but it almost felt like, and it wasn't like he was terrible or anything last year, but it was kind of reminding me of that Vernon Gholston thing heading into 2009, that Rex Ryan's the guy who's going to get him. His second year, he's really going to get jump-started, and it just never happened. Don't think Quinnen Williams was ever as bad as Vernon Gholston, but I was kind of worried that he might just be a run-stuffing defensive tackle who gets his 2 sacks a year and is a solid player, but not worth the 3rd overall pick in the draft. But if you're going to tell me he's had the type of progression that he's had, and Mekhi Becton was going to have the type of year that he's had, I would have thought the Jets would have won at least 8 to 9 games in the season, if not more. In fact, it's the complete opposite. Michael, what have been your thoughts on the defensive line, particularly Quinnen Williams? My least favorite player on the team, Henry Anderson, had an outstanding game today. I think, as you joked earlier, I think he's probably the number one guy that we don't want to see making any plays. I think we can swallow pretty much any other player on this team making plays outside of just veteran bum Henry Anderson, who will under no circumstance be on the team next year. But yeah, just your thoughts on the defensive trenches.
Yeah, you're right on Henry. He played a legitimately good game in this one, which isn't very fun to watch. Probably the last guy we'd like to see playing well right now. But Quinnen's had a great season, came into this game with the most run tackles per game, most run stuffs per game, talking about tackles that held the runner to less than 2 yards, or 2 yards or less, and no first down. Most of those per game among all interior D linemen, more than any safety or edge rusher. So in the run game, he's elevated from pretty good last season to maybe the most dominant player in the league on the defensive line. And then the passing game, sacks haven't been there, but look, the sacks are not going to be there. Sacks have been up for him compared to last year, but still not at a super. He's not going to get them at a super high level when your coverage is so bad that the quarterback can get the ball out right away, when he's stunting a lot like he still is in this defense, when you have no edge rush that's to force the quarterback to step up. So the sacks are not going to be there, but the pressure has been there all season. He came in near the top of the league in terms of his pressure rate. In this game, he definitely had a bunch of pressures that he'll tack on. He had a half sack and another quarterback hit and a few more pressures in addition to that. He's playing really well, and the production in terms of sacks is, you can't look at sacks to evaluate how well a guy's pass rushing, because they're so dependent on so many other different things. And Quinnen right now is on a team that is not giving him the things that he needs to get sacks. But the real impact comes in, your pressures. That pressures and what you're doing against the run is more so, it more captures your overall impact on a snap-to-snap basis. Sacks are just so infrequent that they're great to get, but you can't judge a guy's hundreds of snaps per season on his handful 5 to 7 sacks in a season and use that one number to judge how well he plays. Quinnen is playing great this season. He's doing what he needs to do, and he's taking a big step up. And once the Jets finally get some corners and they get some edge rushers, he'll get his big sack numbers that will get into Pro Bowls, all pro teams. But aside from all of those things, just if you look at what he's doing on film, he has played very well this season, and definitely played good against the Chargers.
Right. And defense, we've been doing a little bit of the looking at forward to what type of moves Joe Douglas we'll try to make in the offseason. Not predicting anything. We obviously have months to talk about the type of players, but just an overall preview of who are the guys in the roster that are going to stay. But defense is a little harder because it's a lot more scheme dependent. Obviously, there are scheme fits for an offense, but for defense, I don't know if the Jets are going to be a 3-4 or 4-3 next year. A lot of that has disappeared in today's NFL. A lot of teams play multiple base. But if the Jets are 4-3, it vastly changes what they're going to do, what type of linebacker they're going to be looking to bring in, what type of defensive lineman. But I am happy with the prospects that the Jets have on the defensive line. I imagine they'll probably end up drafting somebody in the 3rd or the 4th or something to bolster that defensive line. We haven't really seen too much from Zuniga yet. But between Franklin Myers, between Quinnen, Nathan Shepard, I guess Henry Anderson, but I don't think he's going to be here, Foley Fatukasi, there's a lot of things to like in this unit. And as is the case with many teams around the league, it's one among the Jets' better units. Defensive line is just one of those positions that a lot of teams have very solid, good defensive lines. There's a leap to get to the San Francisco level of great defensive line, but the Jets have a very good defensive line. If Quinnen can keep taking the steps, if John Franklin Myers and Foley Fatukasi keep developing like they've been developing, there's a lot to like from this unit. But certainly not something that I'm going to be investing premium assets in unless the Jets are playing a 4-3 and that edge rusher is going to be a hand in the dirt 5-tech 4-3 defensive end. Then in which case he would be a defensive end. But assuming the Jets stick in the personnel that they have right now, I would say that I don't think the Jets should put too much of their assets into the defensive line. Looking at the linebacker position, I think the one guy that you really just have to talk about is Harvey Lange. I mean, he's been all over the place the last 2 weeks. And originally he was a great special teamer, but not much else. And he's really developed. And look at week 1 against Buffalo. He was terrible at inside linebacker, but over the last few weeks, he's really developed into a guy that I think can compete for a starting gig next year. I think him and Blake Cashman are going to be competing against each other. Obviously, you're going to get CJ Mosley back. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought somebody else in. Maybe they bring back Neville Hewitt. But given all the needs around, at corner and at edge and building out the offensive line and receiver, maybe they do just bring back Hewitt, Mosley, Cashman, and Lange and just have those three kind of compete to start alongside CJ Mosley. What are your thoughts on the inside linebacker? And then the edge position, we'll kind of tie it into the defensive line here. We got a little bit from Bryce Huff. Jordan Jenkins had a solid game here. Do you think Jenkins is a guy they bring back, or do you think it's one of those things where he can walk and the Jets maybe go after a guy like Matt Judon? Maybe they do that and bring Jenkins back and draft somebody. There's a lot to add in that edge spot. But I will say the defensive line is getting a lot of interior pressure. The corners are so bad that we're not really seeing the fruits of it. But if they can add a legitimate, maybe 1 or 2 legitimate edge presence, that those corners their performance isn't going to matter too much. Your thoughts on the linebackers and the edge.
Yeah, well, first talk about Jenkins, then talk about Lange. But I think there's a place for Jenkins on any NFL defense. But just the problem with the Jets has been that he's been your number 1 guy on the edge for 5 seasons now, which is just crazy to say that he's been here that long and been their top guy that entire time. But there's a place for him on any defense. He does offer you some ability to stop the run. He's a decent all-around player in pretty much every facet. But if he's your best edge rusher, then you probably have the weakest edge group in the league, which is what has been the fact for the Jets over the past 5 seasons. So should he be brought back? Sure, by all means, especially at the price they brought him back this year. That I think that is definitely reasonable. But the Jets, it's time for them to finally make this position a priority. It's something they haven't done for a long time. Really, the biggest investment they made was drafting Ja'Kai Polite, and that obviously didn't work out all too well. So even in free agency, they haven't done too much at that position. And then, other than Polite, they haven't done anything in the first 2 rounds in terms of edge rushers. So they've ignored a very important position for too long. And now that they used this offseason to really emphasize the O-line, now I think this is the offseason to emphasize that edge position. Both in the draft, you have 2 extra high picks in addition to where you probably take a quarterback, and you have plenty of cap space. So I think it's time to sign a guy like either Judon or Ngakoue, whichever one shakes free, Bud Dupree, whoever you can get, and definitely make some moves there. But Jordan Jenkins, by all means, bring him back, but only if he's not your top starter. That can't happen again if the Jets are going to start competing. But then an inside linebacker, Lange, like you said, Buffalo game was terrible and never even played on defense anymore. It was only on special teams. But now he's been thrown back out there, and he's shown some things. Played really well against New England in this Chargers game. I don't think he was as active, but he did have some good plays. There was one really clutch third down stop he made, I believe, in the fourth quarter to force a field goal. So he's definitely put himself in that conversation to compete for that starting spot alongside CJ Mosley. And we'll see how many starting spots there are. We don't know what this defense is going to look like with the new coordinator. Will there be, one every down inside linebacker and then a rotation next to him? Will they have, 2 or 3 linebackers playing pretty regularly?
And if they go to that 4-3, are they going to need to add a 4-3 outside linebacker? It's just,
exactly. Because right now they've had, pretty much 2 every down linebackers the entire season. But, they could go to a system where maybe Lange's more of an outside linebacker off the ball, or, a Will or Sam linebacker. But we'll see what happens. But he's definitely, at least the past couple weeks, put himself in that mix. He's a restricted free agent after the season. So the Jets do have, the ability to hang on to him, or, if he plays really well, maybe get some draft compensation back for him if someone does want to sign him. But it's good to see a young player emerging at inside linebacker. You thought it was going to be Blake Cashman. He hasn't been healthy enough to show himself in that position, but Lange has emerged as that guy, which is promising. And he's not young. He's 28 years old, but at least in terms of his experience, doesn't have a lot of snaps on tape. So he is, an unproven player who doesn't have a lot of mileage.
Yeah, I totally agree on Lange. And I think he's a guy that we've certainly been critical of, but I will say you called it when we were doing our 53-man prediction, is like, this guy's totally going to stick. He's an elite special teamer. We'll see if he can make the jump to a defender. And then of course, Michael, the GM, I guess you get one of the chalkboard.
I get some stuff right. I get some stuff right.
Yeah. I mean, you were wrong about Jason Myers and you were wrong about Sam Ficken. So I don't know if you can evaluate kickers, because I'm all about Team Sergio. And then you were tweeting me saying that Sam Ficken.
How was I wrong about Sam Ficken? I didn't say
you were tweeting me when Sergio's first game, I forget which one it was. I was tweeting out, it's Sergio time. And then you were responding to me with Sam Ficken GIFs and pictures, basically saying like, how could you? You made yourself
I think I was being sarcastic.
I don't believe that.
Yes,
I think you were as serious as you were.
I'm not a Sam Ficken fan.
I think you were. I think you were a fan of the Schnoz, and you wanted him to be.
I was a Brett Maher fan.
Oh, I forgot it. Yeah, who was the other guy before Jason Myers that you were a fan of? I can't remember his name.
Ross Martin?
Yeah, Ross Martin. That's what it was. Lack of Edwards. You have an affinity for terrible special teamers, but it's all about Team Sergio. It's Sergio season from here on out after Ficken missed those 2.
Yeah, I would just keep him rested for next year. Let Ficken keep driving the tank.
That is true. Last but not least, the secondary, actually probably last and certainly least, the secondary been pretty terrible, but who can blame them? Missing their best corner in Brian Poole, a lot of rookies, a lot of young guys out there. I do like the safety duo of May and Davis. I think they maybe could use a third safety to kind of balance out some of their weaknesses, but I love watching the growth of Ashton Davis. May made a terrific play on the goal line in the first quarter, which I thought was arguably his best play of the year. But then you remember he had that butt interception. I mean, May's had some really good plays this year, a little less consistent than a guy like Jamal Adams, who's actually been fairly inconsistent this year. But May is a damn good football player and a guy that I think should be brought back if unless it's a crazy offer from another team that they have to match. But the corners, Bryce Hall, clearly his strengths rely on zone coverage. I think he did some good things today. Not amazing, but when you look at a 5th-round pick starting at outside corner, I think him and Bless Austin will have a chance over these next 6 games to show that one, maybe both, probably not, maybe neither, deserve to be a starting cornerback next year. I think you can have a Hall versus Bless competition. They're both going to be presumably the outside starters for the rest of the season. If they play well, they can certainly solidify their spot in the rotation for next year. But the Jets defense clearly missing a number 1 corner, maybe even 2 corners, in addition to losing their slot guy with Brian Poole. So that cornerback position and the edge position needs a complete overhaul, and Joe Douglas just needs to redo that entire position. So Michael, your thoughts on the secondary from today? Obviously 2 rookies in Hall and Davis, but probably an underwhelming performance considering the way that Justin Herbert sliced and diced this defense all game.
Well, yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of opportunities with Pierre Desir being cut and Bless Austin on injured reserve. So, there's going to be snaps to go around. And Bryce Hall in this game, I have to say, they were targeting him a lot throughout this game. But I mean, there's that one catch that it was Mike Williams that he made against him. That was perfect throw and catch. I saw Hall make some good tackles in space. I mean, I'm not saying he was good, but I mean, for a rookie, and I posted the numbers, I think last week, but rookie cornerbacks this season have been really bad. Pretty much every single cornerback drafted has struggled this season. It's been a position that has been the most affected, I think, by this shortened offseason, unique circumstances, for whatever reason that is. But all of these rookies have been struggling, and every single qualified cornerback coming into week 11 was ranked in the bottom half of the league in yards allowed per cover snap. So literally everyone has been struggling. So Bryce Hall, I definitely expect him to have a rough season based on that, especially as a 5th round guy who didn't even practice until late in the season and then just got thrown right into the mix. So I definitely expect him to struggle, but long term, I love the value in the 5th round. I was asking for him way up in the 4th round, and then they got him in the late 5th. So it's definitely, I definitely think he's going to be a good player. His length, his ball skills that he showed at Virginia were really good, especially as a zone corner. That's what he did well in college, and that's a lot of what the NFL is now. Definitely a lot more, cover 1, cover 3, dropping into, deep half, deep third kind of zones, more so than man-to-man. And that's what he did really well in college. So I think he's going to be a good player, but I do expect him to struggle throughout this season. So hopefully he stays afoot, gets some valuable reps, shows some flashes here and there. And that's what I think he showed in this game. Overall, was the production good? No, he's probably going to get hit with over 100 yards allowed in this game. But I think there were definitely some reps where you saw, okay, there's stuff to work with this guy. I can see why he was considered a 1st round prospect before his injury. And I'm definitely confident in Hall being good, but I don't think the production is going to be there this season, just because rookie cornerbacks have had such a hard time this season, which I guess is good for the tank. But again, long term, I feel good about Bryce Hall. And in this game, there were moments where you could see definitely some of the tools he has to work with.
Yeah, and Pierre Desir has been terrible this year, but he's kind of the type of free agent signing that I think the Jets should make next year, in addition to drafting somebody relatively high, especially if you trade Daniel Jeremiah thinks the Jets can get a 1 for Sam Darnold. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think they can theoretically get a 2 as long as he plays fairly well over the next 6 games or 5 games, whenever he returns. He does have a little bit of a knack, or at least his rookie year. Those last 4 games clearly boosted his stock. Hoping the Jets can have a similar stretch for Sam Darnold, 4 to 5 games where he plays really well, but they lose all of them. Boost his trade stock, get a 2nd round pick. There's going to be a lot of teams, New Orleans, Chicago, San Francisco, that need that type of young quarterback to build around. If they can get an extra 2nd, then I think you can definitely attack corner there and then make a mid-tier free agent signing there. And then you're looking at, you have your free agent, you have your young rookie. If that's a guy like J.C. Horn, he's a guy I'm a really big fan of. He might not even last to the Seahawks pick. And of course, it depends on the board. And then you also have Brian Poole, who's among the better slot corners. I think he proved this year that 2019 was not a fluke. I mean, he wasn't as good, but he was still a very good corner for the Jets in the slot. And then you have Bryce Hall, who's that 4th corner, that depth option, who can continue to grow and hopefully take that free agent starting spot, and Bless Austin, who round out the depth. Yeah, it's a unit that Joe Douglas is going to have to do a lot of work at. I mean, it's in order of importance, I would say, or at least in order of work to be done on it, corner might be the number 1 position that he has to address, but it's between corner and edge is probably more important. So maybe edge 1, corner 2, receiver 3. But even then you got to address the interior of your offensive line. You probably want to get another running back. You might need another tight end. You look at the linebacker position. There's a lot of work to be done in this roster, and those position groups, especially corner, you're trying to add at least two guys to each of those. So Douglas clearly has his work cut out for him. And I'm kind of glad that we just had an opportunity to kind of go through these different position groups and just see how each of these spots are looking. I agree with you though on Bryce Hall. I'm pretty high on him. I do think he can be a starter in this league, especially in a zone scheme. Davis, I also like. It's yet to be determined if he can be that natural strong safety. He might need to add some weight to his frame, but then the concern there is that you take away a guy's best asset, which is his speed. So maybe you keep him small and light and have lightning in a bottle in that box, but he's only going to get better with the more plays that he plays and can increase his recognition of what's happening, because just so much of the safety position is instinct. But that is pretty much going to do it for us, Michael. Any last thoughts on this this team? Obviously none of it matters unless they have the right coach, but I'd certainly think that this is not a nightmare dumpster fire, terrible situation for Trevor Lawrence, whoever the head coach coming in will be. They might finish 0-16, but I would reckon that, they're better than the 0-16 Browns. They're better than the 0-16 Lions. They just had a lot of stuff go they're against them. But when you look at the assets and specifically the draft capital and the competency in the GM position, I'm still feeling pretty peachy about this. Maybe it's just my rose-colored or my green-colored glasses, but I just feel pretty optimistic about this unit. Just 6 more losses to go. As I tweeted, I'm pretty sure that the 2003 Cleveland Cavaliers are pretty happy they lost their games and ended up with that number 1 pick, because that's kind of what it feels like. You have LeBron James waiting for you, that franchise generational 15-year starter, and you just have to lose a couple of meaningless games. So let's hope the Jets can get it done. My ideal situation is not for them to go 0-16. I hope the Jags can pick up a win, maybe against the Bears, and then we can just cheer for them week 17, knowing the Jets have locked down that number 1 pick to finish 1-15. And then we can have some dignity. We can beat the Pats, and then we could know what awaits us after the season. But Michael, just your last thoughts on this win, this team, and where the direction Joe Douglas has this roster heading.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm definitely not as down on the future of this team as, you would expect for an 0-10 team. But I think it's really important to finish out the season, clinch that number 1 pick. I do not enjoy rooting for losses. Like, I want to see the guys in this team play well. But as, a fan of the team, first and foremost, the most important, the number 1 thing right now that is within their grasp that can push them the closest to winning a Super Bowl in the near future or becoming a team that is capable of winning one is getting Trevor Lawrence and everything that comes with him, increasing the viability of your head coach opening, increasing the attractiveness of your team to free agents, and not just free agents and the head coaches, but the assistant coaches, the front office members. It just brings so much to your team to have that asset of the most promising quarterback prospect we've had in quite some time. So there's a lot that comes with him, in addition to just being the best prospect of the most important position in the game that we've seen in recent memory. And I think it's really important for this team to get everything that comes with Trevor Lawrence. So I don't enjoy this at all, but it's important for this team to get him over, winning meaningless games. But if they can do that and at the same time do what they've done the past couple of weeks, have important young players show progress and inspire confidence that they can be part of the solution going forward, like they have in these past 2 games, then you're doing everything right. You're getting close to that premium asset, and the guys that you do have are playing well and building a foundation that you can, move forward with and build your team around. So these last 2 games, if they can get 6 more of these, would be great.
More preferably this version on Sunday. I thought this was pretty much the ideal scenario where they get, out to a fast start, so you get some fun plays early.
For our viewing pleasure, it would be better for this game.
Yes, because then they got down
Patriots game. I was stressed out. That was stressful.
I would say that was the most stressed I've ever been this whole season, and arguably going all the way back until week 1 of last year of 2019. I mean, I was screaming. Cowboys game, I guess.
Yeah.
I always forget about that Cowboys game. The small glimmer of hope and an otherwise terrible season. But yeah, I mean, I think this was perfect. They get down early to an insurmountable lead, and then you have the rookies, particularly Denzel Mims, lead them all the way back. They were still down 8. So I could basically cheer for them to score touchdowns, knowing that they probably weren't going to win the game. Whereas last week it was the opposite. I was cheering for them at the end of the game to lose, and I thought they were going to win. And that was a lot more stressful. If they can have a lot more of these games where they have terrible second quarters and maybe first quarters as well, and then you have a great second half, but it's just too little, too late. That's perfect. I love the stat padding. It's the Blake Bortles special where he end up with like 35 fantasy points because he threw for 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, down 40. That's what I'm cheering for out of Sam Darnold and the rest of this Jets unit. We'll see when Darnold returns. I would just keep him completely. I think the goal is you just keep him sitting on the bench until he's completely healthy with that AC joint sprain. I don't think there's any reason to play him. It's going to just keep damaging his shoulder. And all you're doing with him putting bad film out there is driving down the price of the trade. Sam Darnold is almost better in theory than Sam Darnold has been in reality. The big draw to Sam Darnold is that he's only 23, that he's been under Adam Gase, that what he's done in 2018 and the parts of 2019. It's the hope that is so attractive of Sam Darnold. It's not necessarily what he's put on the field. So don't put him out there unless you know that you're getting a fully 100% healthy Sam Darnold who can boost his stock. Otherwise, just keep losing with Joe Flacco. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up. I'm as I said, I'm glad we got a chance to just kind of look over at the state of the roster for Joe Douglas, kind of fighting back against the whole this roster is an absolute train wreck. It'll take probably 2 seasons for them to be back in the playoffs. But you add a guy like Trevor Lawrence, they have a lot they can add between free agency and the draft. I think they could be a much better team this year. I think Carolina is a good team to look at, where hopefully they have more wins than Carolina has had, but they're a really competitive and well-coached team week in and week out. And I have no doubt that Matt Rule is going to have them as a playoff contender either next year or the year after that. So that's kind of the hope for next year where Douglas can take this. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We have 6 more games of this hell, and then even 9 months until we get to watch the 2021 Jets. And hopefully that's Trevor Lawrence under center. But you can follow us at CYJPod on Twitter. You can follow Michael at Michael_Nania, myself at Ben W. Blessington. You can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Jets X Factor, which is the best place to go for Jets content. We are also sponsored by Manscaped. Use the code COOLYOURJETS for 20% off and free shipping. As I said, that'll do it for us. Michael, any last words?
Let's go Dolphins and Jaguars and the a million other teams in the strength of schedule tiebreaker race that we need to win.
Yeah, was it a good day? I know we're going to lose our momentum.
Yeah,
was it a good day for the strength of schedule?
It was a good day, even though there were 5 games that mattered on Sunday, and that they only got 2 of them, but they got the most important one by far, which was the Houston Patriots game. Jets needed the Texans to win. Texans won, and that helped them move. At least as of this recording, it's going to change a little bit with this. The Jets are going to go down a little bit after this Sunday night game, but at least as of this, the Jets moved from trailing the Jaguars by 0.043 to now 0.033. So pretty significant.
All right,
for 1 week.
That's yeah. And look, I mean, I would just love the Jaguars to pick up another win and really secure that first pick. Because as I said, I don't want to go in 16, but yeah, the strength of schedule could really help us out here. But certainly if you haven't seen Michael Nania's rooting guide, he tweets it out every week, or we'll put it on our Twitter. You can read his article as well, just so you know exactly who to root for every week. I know Jags fans are probably saying the same thing about the Jets, how we're playing a lot better. Maybe we pick up a win, but I will say Jags are looking better. I think the Jazz can beat the Bears. They could even beat the Browns. They could beat the Colts. I mean, the Jags are not a terrible football team. I think the Bears in week 16 is our best chance to secure that buffer. And then we can go full out cheering for wins, because as you said, Michael, I don't enjoy this, but it's a necessary evil. So that'll do it for us. Thank you for listening. Hope everybody had a great week. And as I said, I think it was 9 weeks ago at this point, don't let the Jets ruin your life. 6 more weeks of this hell, and then sunshine awaits. Go Jets.
Takes the snap, looks left under pressure. Bullets one over the middle, and he's got Crowder at the 10, cuts it back at the 5, goal line. That's over the middle, in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown.
The punter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
There goes Gunner to the 40, to the 30, breaks a tackle at the 20, 10, 5, unbelievable. Touchdown.